Thanks for joining us here at Eagle Auto Repair. My name is Vince, and I want to help you get down the right repair path for your repair question. We're going to take some questions and answers today. I'm also going to put my email address in the video so that you can contact me that way, or you can just comment on the video, ring the bell for notifications. I would appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel. I want to help you with your automotive need. You know, there's not very many places you can go today and get something for free, but I would like you to join me for the next few minutes, and I want to give you some free information, some of the things that I've learned over the 40 plus years as an automotive technician. Let's get right into our questions. Our first question comes from a Jeep Grand Cherokee owner. I have a 2000 Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo, and I rolled my passenger window down a little and it fell all the way down just out of the blue. I know this is very little information, but there's also a video I've attached. Do you have any ideas on what to do or how to rig it shut at least? So late model vehicles use a lot of plastic. Plastic is incorporated because the engineers are trying to get weight reduced on the vehicle for mileage. It gives me a reminder years ago, 1960s, here's an example. 1960s, working on a Cadillac, window regulator is two big gears, metal gears. The motor that drives the window looks like a starter motor. You know, and those vehicles didn't have any kind of safety options. If you got your finger in there and you press the button, it could literally take your finger off. Nowadays, we have a lot of passive restraint type for the window operation to stop. And an example would be that Jeep Grand Cherokee late model. You get your finger in the moonroof when you're closing it, it'll reverse course without damaging your hand. So that's one thing. They've put some plastic in, but the biggest failure for power windows are normally going to be the window regulator, because they don't use the big metal gear anymore, they use plastic. So there's usually a plastic cable or track. Motor will be the motor gear will be plastic, and oftentimes what happens is when they get a little bit dry, they break, and consequently when the regulator fails, the window will just slide down in the track. So quite often when we would get a car in the shop and you'd want to have to take the door panel off to see, diagnose it, and then a lot of times order a part. Well, you want to get the window up, so we would just use packing tape, simple packing tape like this. You just take it once you get the window up and you go on one side of the window, over the door, and down to the other side of the window. Customer could drive the car like that a day or two while you have your part ordered. They'd bring it back into the shop. We would put the part in and then remove that tape without any damage to the paint. So that's how you keep the window up. Again, pretty simple fix once you get a regulator or a motor installed. Usually the common failure is going to be one of those two situations. So the next question is, my daughter's catalytic converter was just stolen from her Prius. I guess that's happening now. We weren't aware. She wants to sell the vehicle, maybe trade it. He's got an estimate from a repair facility, and they're asking for like $2,400 to replace a Prius catalytic converter. So I guess my first question is, a lot of that happens with the higher vehicles. So in other words, a vehicle that someone can easily get themselves under, a higher lift vehicle like an off-road SUV, those kind of vehicles. And what these guys have figured out, what they're doing is they'll roll under the vehicle with a battery-operated Sawzall, make two cuts, take the converter out, and they'll be on their way. We used to actually get them in the dealership where I worked in the city, by the city, and they'd come in with the exhaust kind of wired up and hanging up because someone had stole the converters. There's titanium in the converter when they build it, and so it's a very precious metal. So the resale value for those, scrapping them, is quite high, and that's why people are stealing them. Now I have to chuckle because thinking of someone trying to get under a Prius, they must have jacked it up. I just can't imagine that you could slide yourself, even the skinniest of people, under a Prius and cut the converter out. But be that as it may, I do want to say that $2,400, $2,395 for a catalytic converter replacement, even if it is a registered repair facility and a legitimate repair shop, that seems a little high. Even a dealer part, that's going to be the most expensive converter, the dealer part. But remember, they're marking their parts up. You can go online and you can get that Prius converter for a third of that price. I was looking, $660, $668 for a federally compliant catalytic converter with the precious metal in it. So again, you need to shop around. Any repair. I always tell people here at Eagle Auto Repair, whenever I give you an estimate, I look at your car and we talk about repair. I encourage them, go and get an estimate or a couple estimates. Let me know where we're at, because I certainly don't want to price myself out the door. And I understand that it costs a lot of money to be in business, and obviously you want to be able to maintain your business and be in business, but there's a point where you're making money and another point where you're just overpricing things. And so in this case with the Prius, I would say you need to shop that around, because I'm seeing that converter for a lot less money than what, they're charging you $2,100 or $2,200 just for the converter. That's a little ridiculous. Next question. This one is a 2012 Scion Toyota. I've owned this car since 2015, and in that time we've replaced the rear calipers twice. So 2 times in a 6-year period they've replaced the calipers. The rear passenger side seems to be the most problematic. Every time we replace it, it's because it's seized up to the point of the rim heating up. So the brakes are just locking right up. There's no recall, and we've already inquired about that. At this point, we're just trying to figure out what's causing the calipers to fail repeatedly. So the caliper is that clamping force. It pushes when the pedal is pressed. It pushes the fluid down the line from the master cylinder and into the caliper, which moves a piston out and it clamps the brake pads on the rotor. So when a caliper gets stuck, it could be that the piston is seized. Usually that only happens though if the boot, the dust seal on the outside, is compromised. And in the old days, they used a lot of steel pistons. So it was steel pistons and a steel caliper. You get some moisture, rust in there, it would basically seize the piston and stick. More of them nowadays are Phalonic plastic, a plastic material as the piston. However, they can still fail. There's some screw type pistons in the rear, and they incorporate the emergency brake into that. So when you pull the emergency brake, it screws that caliper down in, and then when you let the cable go, mechanically it releases that piston. So that's the emergency brake. But the number one cause of repeated caliper issues in this case, the first thing that comes to my mind would be a brake hose. If the brake hose collapses, what happens is it allows the fluid to go through one way, but it doesn't allow it to return. So the material inside the hose starts to deteriorate and break down over time, and that hose will allow the fluid to go through, but it won't allow it to return. So it'd be like clamping that, once you press the pedal down, clamping that hose off and not allowing the fluid to come back. That's what happens in the brake hose. So most likely scenario for that vehicle repair is going to be a brake hose. And so then I would also want to have that brake system flushed after you replace those hoses, because the brake fluid can break down over time, get moisture, and so it's always a good idea to get it flushed as well. Final question comes from a owner of a 2001 Mustang GT. It says, I have coolant in the spark plug wells when I pull up the coil packs. What could possibly allow the coolant to come in there? Is it a thermostat housing gasket? I'm also seeing this gunk build up around the well, so I'm thinking it's a manifold. Any advice before I investigate and take it apart? So yes, so the plastic intakes, again, we go back to that first question with weight, regard to weight. The engineers have figured out that we can reduce weight, and wherever they can reduce weight, it's a huge win, because the federal government puts mandates on mileage and fuel mileage and standards, EPA, emission standards. And so the better they can get the mileage, the better their numbers are looking. And so what they'll do is, where they see they can make plastic, and in an intake, it's quite common to see plastic intakes nowadays, where you didn't see that years before. They were, aluminum, cast iron. Back in the day, they were all cast iron, but now you see them lightening up these pieces that they can get away with. And so what happens though in an engine compartment is, even though the plastic is perfectly acceptable to provide an air-fuel mixture, they use a gasket and a sealing material that generally you're sealing it to an aluminum cylinder head. And so whenever we mix materials, we have an issue, but they'll use a thin gasket. And the plastic over time, as it heats up and cools down and heats up and cools down, it becomes brittle. And so consequently, the seal will be compromised, and oftentimes the gasket. And when those intakes either crack over time because they get a lot of heat and cool down, or they lose their sealing clamping force because of they are plastic onto an aluminum head, that's what you'll find. Is you'll find that coolant can seep its way out. The spark plug well, or the head that the spark plug goes, you know, the surface they've machined to have the spark plug go down into the cylinder head will collect that fluid. And then what ends up happening is most times you get misfire because the coil is going to ground out or be, you know, shorted out because of the coolant in the cylinder head. So yep, I would definitely agree. You want to start after your intake manifold. Once you take it off of there, you definitely want to inspect it for cracks. Some of those incorporate, especially on the Fords, an aluminum and plastic sealing situation on certain of those water jackets. So you just want to take it apart, carefully inspect it, and make sure that you're following the torque sequence when you put it back together. And again, aluminum is always very, you have to be very careful when you're cleaning it. You don't want to take any kind of a sanding disc or, you know, scraper that would gouge or change the material. That's a machined surface and you want it to remain that way. So the factory is going to recommend a plastic scraper. Just be very careful when you're cleaning those surfaces up. So I would encourage you, I hope this was helpful, I would encourage you to leave a comment. I'll put my email address in the video so that you can email me with questions. We love to have questions. We love to help you with your automotive repair questions. And again, this is Vince from Eagle Auto Repair. I want to thank you for joining us today. We value your time and we know it's important. So again, as we always say here at Eagle Auto Repair, I hope you enjoyed this video, but as we always say, have a blessed day.